A total of 78 seats for a concert are sold, producing a total revenue of $483. If seats cost either $250 or $1050, how many of each type of seat were sold? So let's do C for the cheap seats. And F for front row and center, fancy seats. So I know that the number of cheap seats plus the number of fancy seats is equal to the 78 seats that you sold. I also know that $2.50, which I'm going to call 2.5, times the cheap seats, plus $10.50, which I'm going to call 10.5, times the fancy seats, however many of those, will show us how much we made, $483. So if we run this through the steps, 1, we're going to write it in matrix form. So 1, 1, 2.5, 10.5, CF equals 78, 483. Got it? Step 2 is we're going to find the inverse of that this matrix here. So we first need to find the determinant. 1 times 10.5 is 10.5 minus 1 times 2.5 is 2.5. 10.5 minus 2.5 is 8. So that's going to be 1 over 8 multiplied by the matrix we get when we swap A and D, 10.5 and 1 swap places. And these keep the same place, but they change signs. So there's my inverse matrix. So step 3 is I'm actually going to multiply 1/8 times my inverse matrix, 10.5, negative 1, negative 2.5, 1, and I'm going to multiply that by my original matrix, 1, 1, 2.5, and 10.5. And again, we're expecting to get the inverse matrix, so let's make sure we do. 10.5 minus 2.5, we already figured that was 8. 10.5 minus 10.5 is 0. Negative 2.5 plus 2.5 is 0. Negative 2.5 plus 10.5 is 8. Multiply that by 1/8 and you get 1001. So that's okay. We get the inverse matrix there. So that is, if I multiply this by 1/8, 10.5, negative 1, negative 2.5, 1, think of these as getting rid of one another, leaving behind only C and F is equal to, but in order to make this work, we've got to multiply the same thing in front of this matrix. So we're going to go 1/8, 10.5, negative 1, negative 2.5, 1. We're going to multiply that by 78, 483. So in this entry, we need 10.5 times 78 plus negative 1 times 483, and whatever you get divided by 8, because we need to take that 1/8 there. So 10.5 times 78, which is 819, and that's going to be minus a 483, 336, divide that by 8, and I get 42. Next one, negative 2.5 times 78, plus 1 times 483, which is 483. You're going to take your result and divide it by 8, because that's what that tells us to do. So 78 times 2.5 negative, we're going to add 483. I get 288, divide that by 8, and I get 36. So CF equals 4236. That is 42 cheap seats and 36 fancy seats were sold. It doesn't sound like a lot of people went to the concert. Oh well. Calvin has $8.80 in pennies and nickels and a total of 560 coins. How many pennies and nickels does Calvin have? Well, we know that the number of pennies plus the number of nickels that Calvin has is 560. That's how many he has. But we know that the number of pennies times 1, because each penny is worth 1 cent, plus 5 times the number of nickels is equal to, well, the amount in pennies, so 880. That is 880 pennies for $8.80. Step 1, matritize 1, 1, 1, 5 pennies, nickels is equal to your result 560, 880. Let's find the inverse. So the determinant of this is going to be, well, 1 times 1 is 1, minus 5 times 1 is 5, which is negative 4. So it's going to be negative 1/4 times, let's see, swap A and D without changing the sign, 5 and 1. Keep these two in the same place, C and B and C, but change their sign. So there's our A inverse. Now we're going to multiply both sides by that A inverse. So what's that? Do you want me to multiply that 1/4 through? Yeah, this one really actually isn't going to be that bad. So let's just go ahead and do that. So negative 1/4 times 5 is negative 1.25. Negative 1 times negative 1/4 is positive 0.25. Negative 1 times negative 1/4 is still positive 0.25. And 1 times negative 1/4 is negative 0.25. There's my inverse matrix. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to multiply that here, and that will leave Pn equals the number of things I want. So if we do our inverse matrix, negative 1.25, 0.25, 0.25, negative 0.25, times 1, 1, 1, 5. We'd better get 1, 0, 0, 1. Now, you might take that for granted, but we just need to make sure that this works. So 1 times negative 1.25 is negative 1.25, plus, let's see here, 1 times 0.25 is 0.25, which is negative 1. Let's see here. Then we're going to get, and I know what you're thinking, don't worry, it's okay. Negative 1.25, I can tell you right now that's going to be 0. 0.25 plus negative 0.25 is 0. 0.25 plus negative 1.25 is negative 1. So it looks like that didn't work out because we got the negative identity matrix, which how we're going to deal with is we're actually going to factor out that negative 1. So now it looks like this. Negative P n is equal to, and so we're going to take our inverse matrix, negative 1.25, 0.25, 0.25, negative 0.25, and we're going to multiply that by our original resultant vector here, 560 and 880. So we get 560 times negative 1.25, and we're going to add 880 times 0.25, and I got negative 480. So if I do 560 times 0.25, and then I'm going to add 880 times negative 0.25, I get negative 80. I'm going to factor out that negative 1. So what this really says is negative P over negative Pn is equal to negative 480 and 80. And now you can just divide both sides by negative 1 or multiply both sides by negative 1 or whatever, and you get that Pn is equal to 480 and 80. That is, he has 480 pennies and 80 nickels. Let's make sure that really doesn't add up. Oh, 80, excuse me. 480 plus 80. 480 plus 80, let's make sure that adds up to 560. It does. Let's make sure the amounts add up to $8.80. So 480 times the value of a penny, 0.01, plus 80 times the value of a nickel, 0.05. So 480 times 0.01, so he's got $4.80 in nickels, plus 80 times 0.05 for $8.80. Perfect. I don't know about you, but I remember when I learned that that works, I was super cheesed because solving systems of equations has never felt easier. A little bit more labor intensive, but a lot easier to just follow through with the steps. Anyway, that's solving systems of equations with matrices. I hope you learned a bunch. If you have any questions, make sure to send a message to your instructor. This is Mr. P signing off, and have a wonderful rest of your day.